Well,
The woman who you
anybody who supports Donald Trump got to be but a little bit thick, haven't they?
that's her idol, Pete.
Yes, I know. Why?
Fan of
Well,
blonde comb overs, possibly.
the thing is, Pete. The thing is, it's the same situation as we're fed so many lies in society.
Yeah.
Do you know what? Right, I've made this mistake twice on the weekend of saying to a group of people, said, "Oh, you must be from Ukraine," and they were a group of Polish people, and they
Oh.
absolutely vented their hatred against Ukrainians. They absolutely hate
No.
them. And then I come across another group of people. I thought, right, these are got to be Ukrainians, and they said the amount of venom that they had towards Ukrainians was unbelievable. So it starts to make me feel. It starts to make me feel now that there's something that we're not being told.
When I was in Ukraine in the 1950s, and we were in a bar, and on the table in front of us, there was a bunch of flowers on the table. And we thought, wonder if they got a microphone in there to listen to what we're saying, just in case we're spies or whatever. So we plotted to blow up the Lenin, which was their nuclear icebreaker. So we plotted to blow it up. We were only 18. It was good
You
fun.
little devil.
Yeah, hang on, Pete. These things about talking about bombs are not a good idea.
No.
As when I went through customs at Aberdeen Airport one day, and I said to the manager, I said, "Oh, I've told you this story, haven't I? I had a trowel in my knapsack, which I was taking on. Yeah. And he said, "What these two objects here, right? What are they for?" And I said, I'm an archaeologist, right? And they said, "Oh, that's okay then." So the security backed away, and then there was a guy alongside me, right, who had a butcher's knife in his bag, and there's true story, and the guy alongside me, I thought he's definitely going to be taken away now, and he said, "Actually, I'm a butcher." And the security guy said, "Yeah, you can take that on the plane with you, right? In your hand luggage on the plane." So I turned around and said to the manager, I said, "If I said I had a bomb in my bag and said I was a terrorist, right?" And at that point, I had two security men in front of me, and the manager. He said, "What did you just say?" And I said, "I didn't say anything." And the manager said, "Yeah, keep your mouth shut."
Yeah.
So me and Pete seem to come from some part of the cloth that me and Pete comes from is similar. Right. Okay. I want to crack on. I want to crack on to where we are. So it would be nice to stop at a reasonable time tonight. I want a nice easy one, and I still got to pack everything away and do the animals. So anyway, it's 7:46, and we're going to get started. So last week we were looking at Staffin Island, and what I'm not going to do to start off with is sort of show you where Staffin Island is. It's on the Isle of Skye and so on. And somebody on my Tuesday class, they said they come across a document. And there's sort of some interesting things in this document about Staffin Island that you may wish to hear. And one thing that we are seeing, and something that I'm really not making you aware of too much, is the reason why we're particularly interested in these early origins now. Maybe this little ditty here might answer that question. So here we go. So if I can get this. So the Isle of Skye, where Staffin Island is, or Staffin Bay is, has been a subject of many histories and writings on its rich heritage and folklore. And it's beyond the remit of any reports to write everything about this information. And it should be said that over and over again, people over time, have attempted to write histories of different parts of Britain. And they haven't really understood the origins. For example, with the Isle of Skye, a history was written about the Isle of Skye in 1871 by a chap by the name of Alexander Cameron, who wrote about Skye, the history and traditions of the island of Skye. And in 1871, it attempted to create a narrative, very interestingly, of the island's past from the Neolithic to the time of writing in 1871, which would have been a bold thing to do in 1871, to even think about the Neolithic, let alone anything else. Remember, 1871 is still a time not to, we were only talking about a couple of decades earlier on where people were thinking about everything sort of associated with the Bible chronology, which takes us to just a few thousand years ago rather than the Neolithic, which is by 1871, 7,000 years ago in their mindset. So what they started to do is they started to try and drag in these islands and various other localities into these historical narratives. And they keep writing various histories of these islands and trying to understand them and trying to bring them up to date with understanding crofting and so on and so on. One thing that we've been trying to do now is we've been trying to really connect the roots of these places in much further than the Neolithic period, and to try and associate them with the landscape today, with all that crofting and with all the history, with all the narratives and stuff. There's lots of really interesting information here. So a broad background to what we were doing last week can be placed thus. The Isle of Skye has seen many archaeological investigations and excavations, from antiquarian investigations to modern archaeology, although few of these projects have focused on the very early history. So what they started to do is understand, really only from the 1970s, that the history of places like the Isle of Skye have a sense of deep time. I've never come across that before, deep time. So in other words, it's got a deep history, which is something that they may have guessed at, but they weren't that close to it before. A deep time of a Paleolithic environment dating back maybe at least 12,000 years. And what they've been trying to get at as well is they've been trying to look at the first settlers of places like the Isle of Skye, as we like to think about the first settlers of Orkney and the first settlers of Shetland. In other words, the first settlers of these settlers within these islands are very similar to any settlers across the British Isles. So they've had this project on the Isle of Skye, Scotland's first settler project, investigated Mesolithic activity across the eastern coast of Skye and the western coast of Scotland, which is rather interesting that we're linking in with the Isle of Skye with the western coast of Scotland. And what they're starting to say is that they're starting to look at the key information and the key evidence for this ancient Mesolithic period, which we nevertheless identified last week. And to sort of identify what we did last week was just a little bit of a recap on that rock shelter at Ancoran, which is part of the Staffin Bay landscape. And just to sort of recap on what we said last week, to sort of try and work out the importance of the Mesolithic in Scotland. And we've got a piece that we're going to be looking at in a moment, which is an article that I've just spotted. And then we're going to look at a bit of the Mesolithic period in Ireland, which would be a rather interesting place to visit. The archaeology of Ireland. I mean, we never ever go there in our lectures, and I'm so reminded, if we're doing the archaeology of Britain, then I think we need to do the Mesolithic in Ireland as well. We didn't really do much about the Mesolithic we really didn't do much about the Paleolithic in Ireland, did we? Don't think we mentioned it much, but we've got to do the Mesolithic in Ireland. So that's what we're doing this week. But anyway, recap on last week and the rock shelter site containing a series of shell middens and other deposits with evidence for human occupation from the Mesolithic and later periods. Again, this is very important that we're linking in these very early periods of history into the modern day and age, into our modern expression of the landscape, into the modern understanding of the landscape. And also that word that we're going to use again, deep time. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Deep time. So much of what we do feel and much of what we do see in archaeology is usually by accident. This rock shelter found at Staffin Bay was a site that was found by accident as they were constructing a road, but they'd known about something there. So I'd like to mention this, and then I would like to just do a final recap on this sort of island of the Isle of Skye. So a total of 41 identifiable deposits, contexts were identified within the very small areas that we were looking at Ancorin and Staffin Bay last week. Some of them later, some of them earlier. And the lowest layers that we looked at last week were identified as Mesolithic, with a series of 18 radiocarbon dates, indicating they contain the residues of earlier and later activity. So what they did find, they went really deep in the archaeology, if we remember, and they actually started to find early Mesolithic activity that may go back even older than anything that we can imagine from Scotland. And what we then found was midden layers that contained evidence of human bones that were dated earlier and mainly to the Neolithic period. The rock shelter was located below an outcrop of mudstone, and they found evidence of mudstone flints, mudstone lithics, if we remember, we looked at them last week. And they were starting to think, starting to understand that some of the evidence that they were finding on the Isle of Skye at this site of Ancorin, some of the mudstone lithics, the mudstone tools that they had, that it actually linked to islands as far away as the island of Rum. And I think that is quite important. We didn't say anything about this last week. I think the idea that we're linking places like Skye to the western coast of Scotland and then to islands like the Isle of Rum, and we're thinking that there's a lot of movement, there's a lot going on, and this idea that there's a lot more people circulating around Scotland than we imagined is bearing out in the archaeological evidence. I remember making a statement. It was based on I think it was based on something I was reading at the time, and this was about 10 years ago. I think I made the statement that there was like something like 400 people living in Mesolithic Scotland, right? I was quite specific by what this person was writing. And then we find all this evidence of all these variety of different places in Scotland and in England and Wales. And we're so far out in trying to understand the archaeology in the Mesolithic period that so much more is being understood. So what we're finding now is that on the Isle of Skye alone, they found over recent years 120 new archaeological sites, and they're starting to really find new archaeology in places like the Isle of Skye. And the one thing is that there's so much more out there to discover, and there's so much information, and it's going to be very interesting to see as they start to turn up more evidence. Is there much earlier evidence in Scotland than we could ever imagine? And that would change the model as well. That would change all our thinking. So what I'd like to do now, I'd like to look at that article that I mentioned earlier on, and that it's a piece that I did find earlier on as well, and it's entitled "Exciting Stone Age Discoveries in the Cairngorms." And yes, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the Cairngorms, and it looks at all these different localities of very early evidence and shelters and all these other wonderful localities. So and some nice images as well. So let's just go with that. And we want to know where the Cairngorms are. So let's just sort of tap that in. Okay, so let's just go with another one. I've got to make sure I write this rightly. The karl-james. So it'd be nice to sort of center us on this one. Karl-james. There you go, karl-james. And if we type in a little map, we should be able to get it. Is everything okay with you, Andy? Have you done any saving people today?
Sorry, just had to switch my mic on. No, I keep missing them at the moment because I'm working on outside of properties and I'm miles away.
Okay.
It's been a bit quiet recently.
Okay, fair enough. That's a good thing, isn't it, Andy?
Yes, it is. It's nice.
Carl, with these islands and the people being on them, is it not prudent that these islands, because of the lack of predators there, it's very useful for them to take their sheep and their animals over there because of the lack of predators? So they're much easier to manage on an island than they would be on the mainland, where you have all the wolves and all the other predators.
Well, that actually, Peter, when you're saying that, that's like a book, right? And the reason why I'm saying that's like a book is that most of the evidence that we're seeing, this is a thing, we don't really know their relationship with sheep and cattle and goats and pigs and all these other things. That's another part of the story, Peter. And what I'm going to say, Peter, right? We don't know enough to answer that question. And what I'm going to say, you're jumping the gun, Peter, because we don't really. That's a positive criticism, Pete. You're jumping the gun because we need more data. We need more information, and we don't really understand. And what you just did then, you sort of actually partly what you just said is actually completely correct in another way, right? You're going to be taking your animals along the coastal margins because you don't want to go into the woodland. You don't want to go into the forests, right? So you're going to keep out of there. It's not just to keep your animals safe, Pete, it's to keep yourself alive. So you could say that that's probably a true statement. Isolating yourself on an island has a positive and a negative, but you don't know it's going to become an island, like the people of Orkney. So that's sort of that's something to put into the mix. Here's the karl-james. So Aberdeen over there. So we're talking about Aberdeen and Dundee archaeology students, right? So those two are there, and you're looking at the karl-james there, and this is, Pete. This goes against everything that you just said because you're getting Mesolithic activity in the middle of Scotland, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, that blows our minds because that goes against everything I've said. Because what we're seeing evidence in the guts of the landscape rather than along the coast and the coastal margins and the islands which are to be. So let's just have a little look at what this article says and what this article tells us, because it is in the middle of the Scottish Highlands. So this is something else, Peter. But what we need to remember, Peter, is that I have been saying that there's not one model for the Mesolithic period. Okay, you've got these people on the coastal margins, you've got these people in valleys, you've got these people high up with their rock shelters and everything else, and looking out at the landscape. Now they're by the sea, and you can take a look at Hawick, you can look at Cheddar Gorge, you can look at, well, Cheddar Gorge is slightly different. You can look at Brixham and all these different places which are now by the sea, but there's lots of different balances, and Star-Carr is completely different. And obviously Star-Carr is completely different from Boulder. There's all these. I think what we need to remember is that there's so many different landscapes in this Mesolithic period. It's not, when Peter, you just shouldn't have said anything. When we look at, for example, the Paleolithic period, one thing that we can think about is that we think everybody lived in caves, which we know they didn't. But there is a big association with caves simply because that's where most of the evidence is. But when now we're finding stuff outside caves, and it's into this evidence, and it's also that idea that you've got Paleolithic stuff, you've got Mesolithic stuff. Now there's something that we need to say, which is quite difficult, and what we need to say that's quite difficult. By the way, this is the excavation at Karl-james. This is a year ago. Is how many of the people that developed our population were actually already here? Was there more people actually around than we think? Because it's almost as if we're told, and it's almost as if I've intimated, but not fully, because I've held myself back a little bit. We almost assume that lots of people are coming over and there's a few local people and that's that, right? What we need to think about is how many people were actually here, and no, we're not really answering that question. So I think this is something that we really need to look at. Now, this is rather interesting. This is again BBC News website, exciting Stone Age discoveries in the Cairngorms, right? And University of Aberdeen students at work to unearth the traces of the Stone Age inhabitants of the Cairngorms. Now, it doesn't take an idiot to work out that they're not very deep. Those guys are about 75 centimeters deep. They're not quite a meter, are they? And they're down onto the archaeology. And I think that is, again, this is in the upland areas. So it's by what we said. Lots of the evidence in upland areas is quite low, is quite low in the archaeology, i.e. you don't have to dig deep and you actually get to it. So you're actually into the archaeology, not straight away, but underneath that peaty layer, and it's not too deep, into the clays and the muds, the glacial stuff, which is left back behind by the last glaciation. But there we go. And maybe I need to say something else as well, that what we do find is that if don't quote me on this, but about 14,000 years ago, the ice was really starting to melt, and then what we do, we have a real cold phase again towards the late part of the last glacial period. We have a Paleolithic Pleistocene period. We have a real cold period of about 1,000 years, right? We've said that, and then suddenly 12,000 years ago, around there, right, it started to get warm quite rapidly. Right now, the one thing I've got to say is, were there microclimates across Britain? Peter will know this. There's places in Cornwall that you can grow anything, from the Caribbean. You can grow tea, you can grow anything, right? Because you've got microclimates, right? And down the road it's bloody cold, right? Because you've got microclimates, right? How do we know that there weren't places in Britain within the Ice Age that were actually quite warm, right? That is something. We've got this. I mentioned microclimates before, but I've not really been into it, right? But I think we've got to be very careful of putting everything into categories. It's that thing that we're breaking, isn't it? We're breaking down the idea that in the Roman period everyone was Roman, because they weren't. We're breaking down the idea that everyone in the Roman period actually all the Romans lived in Cornwall, which is when they didn't, right? So what we're doing, not the whole of Britain was Roman. So we're breaking down that idea. What we got to do is also break down these old ideas about the Mesolithic and the Paleolithic, which we have done and which we've achieved. And actually, just another 2 more weeks on the Mesolithic period, and then we're into the Neolithic, and that's going to be on for ages. So the new research within the Cairngorms is that the evidence that they're finding is classed as rare, and covering rare evidence of people who are living in this area at the end of the last ice age. That is a bloody bold statement to make. And excuse my use of bloody, but it is a bold statement to make. And what they've done is, within the archaeology that you're seeing, or a little bit of it, they got traces of fire pits and possibly shelters. Hang on a minute. Outside shelters, glacial, and right. It doesn't compute, because haven't we said that most of that evidence has been taken away by these great glaciers? One thing I need to say is the great deception that I and most other archaeologists use when we're describing the last ice age. And a great deception, and I've got to wise up and bold myself up with this one, right? We're not talking about massive ice sheets, which are 2 or 3 meters. We're not talking about massive ice sheets that are 2 or 3 miles high, right? We're not talking about the entire landscape completely covered in a huge ice sheet that's hundreds of meters tall. In fact, there would have been areas that had no ice across Britain. There would have been upland areas in Scotland that there was no ice, right? It was just tundra. It was just bloody cold, and the ground was frozen. So I think this is something that I also need to break in your minds. I need to basically say, okay, so let's just, I think this is important that I do this now, because I need to open our minds more. And I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to stop the share. And I want to sort of do a little bit whiteboard sharing, because this is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be learning stuff. So, so if we sort of took a typical landscape, right, undulating like that. So maybe the impression that most archaeologists are given, and that the whole of Britain's covered in a huge ice sheet like that, right? And then suddenly it melts, and that's all gone, right? So if we think about the last 12,000 years ago, if we think of it in a different way, right? And I'm gonna wise up now, and I'm gonna just sort of help us to understand this a little bit more. And maybe we're thinking about, oh, hang on, it's deleted it all. So there we go. It's gone yellow now. So what we need to then think about the landscape as maybe little miniature glaciers in the valleys, right? And all this stuff is like permafrost, right? But these are where the little miniature glaciers are, right? Only little miniature glaciers, right? Not huge things, little miniature glaciers in the valleys, right? And they've been there for a long time, right? Remember, it's now the end of the ice age. These could have been big glaciers at one point, but they don't need to be massive glaciers, right? Slowly moving, right? And then suddenly what happens? So if instead of looking at a cross section, we'll look at a different view. And if we look at that there, right, and we raise all that there, and basically these glaciers in the valleys, you could basically think, right, hang on, where's my little line there? Good. Thinking about a glacier like that, right? And what's happening? And there's the ground surface, right? And what there is at the end there, you've got the ice sheet, right? So we could be thinking about miniature ice sheets moving and retreating, right? 12,000 years ago. So suddenly you might get the summer, right? And what happens is that a load of crap is dropped, which is called a moraine, right? And then the ice is slowly retreating, right? And then you get the next summer, and you get another moraine, right? And you get another retreat, and you get another moraine, right? These little banks and whatever. And along the whole thing, they're dropping, as it's slowly retreating, they're dropping lots of boulders. But when you get summer months, they drop all their stuff, right, and the glacier retreats. This is how this works. It's basic geography, right? And this is what's happening, and this is why our landscape all humps and bumps and shaped and all the rest of it. Another thing that we need to think of, and it's so easy to be in a field with me and Andy really excited, and me and Andy saying, "Oh, look, that earthworks over there. It's definitely part of a building, right? It's definitely earthwork, part of a monument or whatever, right?" But we've also got to remember that Mother Nature creates these earthworks, oxbow lakes, meandering lakes, glaciers dropping their deposits along the landscape, boulders in a field. So Mother Nature can create some of this, and all this is the type of landscape that our Mesolithic ancestors are looking at. Yeah, I needed to do that there. And what we're going to do, we're going to go back to that little article now, and we're going to go stop share. We're going to do that there, and we're going to go finger. And you know, the wonders of doing this is that you can just it's great to sort of be able to go along and sort of rewrite and correct yourself, which is something that I like doing, and it helps us to understand what's going on a lot more. And therefore, back to this image and back to what we just discussed, there is a link, Mike, folks. Therefore, we might actually be able to find more Mesolithic sites, and actually, let's just say it. Let's be very brave, Carl, right? Let's say we might actually find Paleolithic sites in upland areas that were not erased away by glaciers. They weren't touched by glaciers, right? Because the glaciers were in the valleys. Maybe we might actually find more Paleolithic sites in the upland areas. And actually, folks, this is it. This is it. So not to say I'm right, but I'm just writing in that we've got the evidence. So yes, we're thinking about this. And the Cairngorms, they're getting evidence of hazelnut shells, again dating evidence from this type of site that go back at least 10,000 years ago. Maybe we could push it a little bit further. And do you know what? They in this article they've used the words ancient rest stop at store site, whatever that means. And look at these wonderful artifacts. Aren't these great? Aren't these flint artifacts great? That if that's going to be flint there on the left, flint in the middle. That might be chalcedony, the one on the right. That's what chalcedony looks like. That looks like his chert on the right. The one on the left looks like his flint. And that there, oh God, is that? I think that might be a type of flint. I'm not sure. The one in the middle, but you can actually get an idea that these tools from the past are all different colors, and it's like this is the thing, you see. You think, oh, it's a load of old bloody flints, Andy, right? That's all there is, right? But it's not. What we've got flints, and we've got artifacts of all different colors. And I think in many ways it gives that sort of depth and sense of appeal within this Mesolithic genre. So what they are doing is obviously the work in 2020, 2021, they are exploring this landscape over a wide area. And how big are these artifacts? There's a scale. So they're a centimeter wide, and maybe up to sort of 4 centimeters in length. So sort of not massive things. These you could class these as sort of microliths, but earlier types of microliths. So obviously going back into the article again, it's saying the evidence for those who lived in Scotland after the end of the last ice age can be hard to find, say archaeologists, but now we're getting it. Now I'm going to read this. I'm going to read more into this article because the person who wrote it is still sort of in that mindset that we've got to sort of expand. they make the statement, the population at the time was low and the communities of hunter-gatherers were mobile, moving around and living off the land. Well, yeah, the population was low. If I said that the population of Scotland in the Mesolithic period was 10,000, that's pretty low considering the population of Scotland today's 8 million, right? So what does that mean? I'm not saying it was 10,000. I think that would be quite daring of me to say that. But then again, when you think about all the islands, and if you dump people off in Shetland, you dump people off in Auckland, Orkney, and you dump people on the Isle of Lewis, Rum, and you Skye and all these other places, right? You start to get lots more people. And Peter used this word earlier on about animals. You're traveling with animals and so on, right? How are you going to move around with those animals grazing? Well, maybe you are, but if you like an area, you might stay there. So living off the land and being part of the landscape is sharing. And it's that sort of way life transition where things are obviously interchangeable, right? In lots of things going on with lots of different people, with lots of different mindsets. And it uses this statement here, they did not build permanent monuments and their homes were usually temporary. Well, usually temporary. I like the word in there. Well, we know that's not the case, is it? Some of their stuff was quite permanent. And again, when we use the words, obviously low populations, we've answered that one. When we've used the word temporary, what is temporary? So if I was saying the other day, right, that this building that is here, it's probably going to last 5 years. It could last 6 years. That's a temporary structure. But hang on a minute. If I'm typing on my computer, writing a new book, and I've been in this space for like 6 months, that's not temporary, is it? So it's that definition about what temporary is. For example, Andy might decide to, Andy, you must have been in your house for 10 years, yeah? Say you moved somewhere else. Yeah, no, got it right. So if you say moved with Karen and the girls down the road, and you said, like, this is going to be our permanent home, would you describe this place that you're living now? Are you describing that as temporary because you've only been there 10 years, but you moved to the other place and you're there for 40? So is your place now? Do you see what I'm trying to say? So it's that sort of, it's that sense of what is permanent and temporary. And I think wherever you put your hat as your home, that's a little bit more permanence, right?
These people, surely, whenever they settled somewhere, there had to be an advantage for that particular area for them to stay in it. And as long as that advantage remained, they would stay. Once that advantage had gone, then they would move.
It's exactly the same thing with Andy. Not to sound too personally, Andy, you're where you're living for a reason, right? Peter, you moved to Barry because of a woman, right?
Yep.
Well, I think the word temporary is an anathema. Therefore, I think what we've got to do, we've got to build into we've got to build these people more into the landscape permanently rather than temporary. What traces of their lives that can be found often amount to a handful of tiny stone tools, such as flints, discolored soil that hint at an ancient hearth or the stance of a shelter. Because, and you're thinking, well, how the hell is this shelter evidence actually survived from the Paleolithic period into the Mesolithic period when there's these blooming glaciers that weren't there in the first place? So because of this evidence has long been buried over time, the easiest locations for archaeologists to search. Yeah, listen to this. So what we've done, we've based all our ideas up until now. Not really, we haven't, because we've been looking at different sites, such as Craswell Crag. We've been looking at sites such as Cheddar Gorge. We've been looking at sites that are inland, Starcars inland. So, you know, it's this site is inland. This one, it's in the middle of the Cairngorms. Listen to this statement. Because this evidence from the Mesolithic has long been buried over time, the easiest locations for archaeologists to search are along sea-eroded coastlines or on farmland where farm work can bring buried evidence close to the surface. the Cairngorms is not farmland and it's not by the coast. This is why the evidence hasn't been found up until now. So therefore, we see an inevitable bias in how we look at the archaeology. And it's this, yeah, I'll give you another example of that. Up until very recently, we actually thought that the Romans actually built a new town in London, Londinium, from more or less AD 44 onwards or AD 43 onwards, and there was nothing there beforehand. But they may have gone to London because there was already something there, like they went to Colchester, Camel and Junum because there was already people there, like they went to Caliva Atrabatum, Silchester. Andy, I've said it after months, after years, Caliva Atrabatum. The reason why the Romans went there is because there was already something there, but it's very difficult to trace the evidence. The other thing as well is that there is this evidence everywhere if you find it and search for it, and it opens the eyes and it makes you more understanding of the impact of the Mesolithic world. While archaeologists have long suspected Mesolithic communities occupied mountain landscapes, little evidence to support that has been discovered. Now a team made up of students from the University of Aberdeen and Dublin and Dundee actually has uncovered evidence confirming people were living in the Cairngorms at least 9,500 years ago, 10,000 years ago. And we're thinking, wow, that's unbelievable. Wow, that's amazing stuff. That's amazing, that is. And then it ties in with what we said about Shetland last week, does it not? That we've got eroded evidence in Shetland at West Bow. And the West Bow site is fairly late Mesolithic. And we said, well, that's the earliest stuff from the Mesolithic. I've been there. I went there with Dr. Simon Clark. When we went there, he said, oh, this is all we've got in the way of Mesolithic activity. And that was it. That's how we left it. And then we think, well, actually, you know, what we've got to think about is that, you know, the Mesolithic stuff is probably eroded out at sea, or it's in upper areas in the Shetland Islands. There are mountain ranges in Shetland. There are upland areas in Orkney, and you're going to find this Mesolithic stuff. You just got to look. The teams finds at several archaeological sites in the Cairngorms, including traces of fire pits, flints, and possible huts from the Mesolithic period, were made on land owned by the National Trust for Scotland. Archaeologists believe Mesolithic people headed into the hills carrying their own provisions, which they later supplemented for hunting deer, fish, and birds, and foraging for plants and fungi. Love it. Mushrooms, eat your heart out. Larger mammals such as deers also provided them with skins for use in clothing and shelters, sinews for binding, and antler and bone for use in making tools. And do you know what? Do you know where we're going to go there? I need to ask myself a question. And it's a question that's come back to haunt me again. Right. And I like making things difficult for myself. We had and it's a shame Gina's not here tonight, right? We basically talked about the whole of Britain being covered by trees, did we not? And we basically used that adage that you could have been a squirrel and you could have gone from the Isle of Sicily. Well, it wouldn't have been an Isle of Sicily. You'd gone from the bottom part of the Mediterranean, waving to Africa. And you could have just hopped along the tree line up through the Alps. You could have gone over to the Pyrenees over there, but you can't. You're just going to go straight on up through to Paris, and then you're just going to go over Doggerland. You're going to hop all the way. You know the story, get to Scotland, and then get to Orkney. Right now, and I've said that all these upland areas had trees. Right, I've always said it, and I will bank on that. Right, but I'm starting to get the willies because I'm thinking, well, why are these people going into the upland areas? Right now, maybe they would. Can you all bear with me a second? Bear with me a sec. Hang on, stay there. Hello. I'm teaching, so if you stay there a minute. Stay there. Yeah, stay there. Oh, hang on, folks. I'm back with it. We'll have a break in a minute, right? We'll have a break, but I'll finish my point, right? And then we could do some questions after the break, right? So this is the thing, right? Maybe, right? Maybe the trees did cover the whole of Britain, right? But these people have got to these areas like the Cairngorms before the trees became established, right? And they went to places like Orkney before the trees become established. They went to the Isle of Skye before the trees become established. And they may have prevented the trees becoming established in the first place, right? So that's a big question. Or there's another reason why they went from the coast inland, because there weren't any trees there in the first place at all, right? Or they went from the coast inland because there was no animals. There weren't those wolves in the woodland. So there's all those very interesting questions about those trees. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna have my chat a minute, right? So I'm gonna have my little break. So you think of those questions. You think of some questions. We're gonna go into Ireland after the break, right? So I need to all think of some questions. So we're going to stop that, and we're going to stop that there. I'm gonna take my break now. So I want you to build up your questions, and we'll have the questions after the break. Is that all okay?
Yep.
Good plan. So that's what we're going to do. You guys go and make your cup of tea or whatever, and I will dangle my feet over where I forgot then that there are no steps there, and then I nearly broke my neck. So right. So anyway, I'm gonna crack on, and we'll do all the questions after the break. So we'll see you in about I don't know, 10 minutes. Okay. See you then, folks.
Okay.
See you then. See you then.
Hmm.
Hello. Looking for right. Okay, let's get going. Right. Okay. Let's get going. Let's get ready to rumble. Right. Okay. So, who wants to start us off with questions? Andy. Hello, Andy. Houston
sorry.
calling.
Yeah, sorry, I was in the middle of writing a letter.
It's not your resignation to Archaeology Cymru, is it?
Not just yet, no. I
Oh,
think I
right.
got about another 10 months to go on that one, haven't I? So,
Have you?
yeah, having just paid it. So I'm not going to resign
right.
now. Yeah,
Oh, well, that's a shame, Andy. I was hoping to
sorry
go
about that. Yeah.
I was hoping to go off with the money.
Yeah. Well, you can go off with the money anyway. Nothing's stopping you doing that.
Yeah, I was gonna treat Claire to a meal. I was.
A slap up meal. Yeah.
Yeah, me and Claire will go to a cavery at £10 a head, right?
Absolutely great idea. No, just a couple of observations. Actually, no. I find the whole concept of these early periods really interesting, because more and more information is becoming available, and people are starting to question it a lot more sensibly now as well. And
yeah.
I mean, that they found the human remains in Claire's cave on the north side of our estuary, which is south facing, and were dated to just under 14,000 years ago. And of course, most people wouldn't believe that, because they believed that theory that, of course, everything was covered in ice down to Birmingham until 7,000 years ago or whatever. And it wasn't until the British Museum confirmed that the dates were accurate that they started to think, oh, clearly it wasn't. Now
It's completely wrong. Yeah.
Now, microclimate or whatever, those caves were on a early coastline. So that would suggest that whatever glaciers there were had already receded past that point at that point, and clearly they were here. But and the other thing was, we talk about the Romans and no London and all the rest of it. I came across a really interesting quote in a book, which is so blatantly obvious that I found really stupid for not thinking about it before. He said, do you think that the Romans really built a road in a straight line because there was nothing there? Or because the towns were already there and were already connected with a non-paved road in the first place, and therefore civilization's been there for thousands of years probably before that. So life begins before the Romans. Yes.
How dare you even think that, Andy? That's
I just
blasphemy.
thought what a great quote. And I thought, yeah, it's so obvious. You said you were saying there's not the evidence is there. Well, the evidence is there. It's right under our noses in the geography,
Yeah.
So, but nobody's really looked at it that way before.
No, they haven't looked at it. It's they haven't, and it's quite shocking that we. Do you know what I feel? And I've had this sort of gut for a while, right? And I'm going to express it now. Why are archaeologists so territorial? Why are they so sort of? It's got to be this way, or you're going to die, or if you don't agree with me, you're the most evil person on the planet. And there's so much of that, and I just feel that there shouldn't be. I just feel, sometimes you can tell from my language, I don't want to say this, or I'm not going to say it, or shouldn't even be thinking like that. I should just spurt it out. There's some bits of that thing about population is that's blasphemy, but the evidence is there to tell us that there's something else going on.
It is a problem with archaeologists. They're terrified now to publish at all, aren't they? Because they might be made to look idiots, or they might, and also they might reveal the site and all the rest of it. But you're thinking, oh, come on, how can you ever have any debate and learn anything unless you do just say, well, this is what we found so far. That's all you've got to say,
Well, actually, do you want to, Andy? You want to take me back 35 years? This is what I always said. I said, well, archaeologists are there to give the evidence, and then you guys can make up what the bloody hell you like.
You remember you used to have that discussion about is archaeology a science or an art?
Yes.
And I argued that it was an art because it took scientific information, but it then created a story, a narrative around that, and therefore it was still an art. There you go.
Just like the Star Car pendant.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Yeah.
That's what the Star Car pendant is.
Yeah.
It's art.
Yeah.
Well, I know, but the thing is, It's that thing in archaeology to say, well, we can lots of these things can be right because they've been used for different things and so on. It's like absolute blasphemy that Stonehenge could be used as a building with a roof on it. Well, the area that I'm sat in isn't much smaller than Stonehenge. I'm going to put a roof on it. Right. Well, okay. It's not a lot smaller than Stonehenge. It's really not. And we've got the timbers in our own wood to put a roof on it, and those timbers have only been growing. Those timbers have only been growing 50 years, right? So there were trees around in the Neolithic period and the Bronze Age, which were thousands of years old, and were long, scraggly things, and you could surely get the length. And that, I tell you what, right? I would be burnt at the stake even now for even suggesting that, Andy. Yeah, that's terrible. Right. Anyway, right. Okay. We are doing questions. Oh God, I've got news here. David, anything you want to say, love?
What do we think made them move up into the Cairngorms when there wouldn't be much pressure around the coast?
Well, that actually, David has just said something which is really interesting. One of the things that we say, Andy, remember that old word marginal land? The reason why we're living along the lake margins, the reason why we're living along the coast is because all the stuff inland has been occupied, right? But now we're seeing something else, that the reason why we're in the marginal lands is because there's loads of trees there. So it's the other way around. Maybe, well, the thing is, within all the sort of canopies of trees, the trees are already there, but not necessarily the animals. So maybe there is no competition within some of those tree lines further up, and therefore there's no real threat, and human beings can go deeper and deeper into these woodlands without much. But you've also got to get into these woodlands. You've also got to be able to. These are oldie, worldy, gnarly woodlands, or are they there yet? So it's that thing, and maybe. There's so much we could expand on that so greatly, and I do see what David's saying, and we've answered it, not answered it at the same time. So David, we're there's a lot of stuff going on. Hopefully that's answered a little bit, David.
Okay. Yeah.
Good. And the only woman along today, Pete.
Well, wherever they went, there must have been an advantage of going there. They must have had a reason for going. They don't just go to places for the sake of it. They had a reason for going there.
Yeah.
What that reason is, we cannot be sure. It may be for a safety reason, maybe because they found a nice valley with its microclimate, like you were talking about. And there they could grow things that they couldn't grow in other areas. Or perhaps, like I said, there was a lack of predators around that particular area. But there must have been a reason for them going into the Cairngorms, for them to do it. It must be to their advantage.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they wouldn't go there.
Well, that's what David said and whatever. But you know when Jules Verne wrote Journey to the Centre of the Earth, right? That's talking about areas that don't exist within our timeline. There are other worlds within other worlds, and that's talking about the idea of microclimates. And it wasn't a Jules Verne thing. It was there was another film or something out in the 1950s where
the Lost World.
That's it, the Lost World, right? Beyond the ice, there's like, and this is the thing. This is the other thing as well, is and we're going to go too deep now. We've got to crack on, and we'll do Margaret. We see archaeology, and we say people could never have lived there, right? And we see archaeology, and we think, right, they must have had a hard, bloody life, right? Well, what do we know? you know, when we look at about Chaco Canyon and we look at Mesa Verde, in the center of the United States, Arizona, and we look at New Mexico, those areas, those populations there, the Pueblos, and the Anastasi, and all those things that we've discussed in other lectures, they had microclimates. They had a way of living that you can't live there today. And this is all really important stuff to see and understand. And also we look at sorry, Margaret, I don't want to hear from you, Margaret. I do. When we look at Stonehenge, we only see Stonehenge within its landscape today, right? We don't see Stonehenge within a landscape that did exist, that is no longer with us. And the idea that we're gonna, I don't know what's happening with Stonehenge now, whether they're digging the bloody tunnel or not, but this idea that Blinkmead, we mentioned Blinkmead the other week, which is really close to Stonehenge. We're talking about water levels and all the rest of it being changed because of the tunnel and so on and so on. And we're thinking, yeah, that's what we're saying, because there are things that we don't see and we don't understand, and everything. That's the nature of history and archaeology. Everything changes, and there are other areas of history that that I sometimes get deeply into research these days, and I'm gonna say it, right. I'm going to say it. This is not even related or linked to this, but it's expanding the mind, right? I've had this obsession with Germany and the Second World War for years, and I've come fully to understand that Germany could never have won the Second World War in every single scenario, and I'm glad I got to that. And then I've started to get really deeper into what caused people to do what they did in Germany, right? And then I got to the end of the journey and I thought, why is it at the end of the war that Nazism, the National Socialism, just suddenly died? And I started to think that maybe people weren't that fanatical in Nazi Germany after all, right? Because if you compare Nazi Germany with something like the IRA, you could never extinguish the IRA, and they kept on killing and bombing people. After the Second World War, the idea of Nazism just faded and went away, right? And what I'm saying is, if you look deeper into things, you see different answers and you see different realities, and the information is starkly in front of you to understand. And this is what we're doing with the Mesolithic period. Margaret.
No, I've had no questions, strangely.
Oh, you rebel. We all went on hoping that we could make you upset and you had something to say. On the mind. Right, okay, right, let's just crack on. So I want us to look at and I'm very aware I'm in this little building here and there's no lights. So hang on, have I got a light there? Yeah. Oh, I do have a little bit of a light. No, so there we go. I want us to actually look at Jersey, and then we're going to look at Ireland, right? So I just wanted to say this, and that there's this nice little piece in Current Archaeology, right? And I'm going to introduce it because this is where we're going to go next week, right? So tracing an island's French connection, rather interesting. It was a Current Archaeology thing. And what this article is talking about is that 15,000 years ago, there was a Paleolithic population living on Jersey, right? We'll do more of this next week. Excavations in Jersey have uncovered the remains of a Paleolithic campsite. And what they're then starting to look at is all that evidence there is so massive and so sort of so expansive, and then it leads us into the Mesolithic period. So we're starting to see it sort of a direct link between the Paleolithic and Mesolithic, very much to what I've already said. I said that earlier on, that what we do find is that, is there a continuous population from early times that runs all the way from the Paleolithic period into the Mesolithic period? And in fact, there's more people who survive from the Paleolithic period and continue in Britain than ever meets the eye. So this is what we're going to be looking a little bit further at next week when we look at Jersey. Because again, we don't look at the Channel Islands, do we? So right, get to the Irish thing, and we've got a couple of images, and not many, but it helps us out. So we do that there, and we go screen, and we go, and a partridge in a pear tree, right there, and we go there, island, a reconstructed building, in Ireland. That does look like Star Car, but it's Ireland. So we're thinking of this, and straight away we're thinking, you've mentioned Star Car. It looks like Star Car. Why are we in Ireland? How are we doing Ireland? And I wanted to do the Irish Mesolithic period. So what we've got is acutely the idea that we see more activity in the Mesolithic period in Ireland than we see Paleolithic activity, because it's probably because we're still trying to work out the Paleolithic landscape in Ireland. So Irish history, and what we're finding, there's a little island called Mount Sandal, which is just north of the Irish coast. And within this landscape, what they have been finding are middens, campsites, and this is started to make them expand on their understanding of the Mesolithic period in Ireland. So let's think of this statement. The earliest known human burial in Ireland dates to 9,530 years ago. Well, actually, we started off with burials. That's really interesting. So the first thing that we're seeing from the Mesolithic period in Ireland is a burial associated with the River Shannon in County Limerick, which shows the early inhabitants had begun to move inland. Hang on, this is interesting. Inland along the rivers and were not confined to the seashores. That is what we've just been discussing. Read that again. We've got people in the heart of Ireland in County Limerick, alongside the sort of modern day River Shannon, and they've begun to move inland along the rivers and were not confined to the seashores at this early date. And they found an adze with the burial, and it's an adze which was used for ploughing, or it can be interpreted as an axe. So we've got evidence of early ploughing in Ireland nearly 10,000 years ago. So it would help us to understand where the hell the River Shannon is in relation to County Limerick and Ireland. So that's where we're going to go next. So obviously talking about Ireland. So where's this County Limerick in Ireland? So let's just go with that. Let's just type this in. Place I'm looking at is a place called Hermitage. And again, it's so sort of useful to have this access when we're doing this. There's a place called Hermitage in County Limerick, so we can get an idea and think, well, okay, how far is this inland? So, and again, wherever this is inland, it would have been much further inland than the present day coastlines allow. There we go. Let's go over there. Come on. There we go. We're going to be able to get there. Come on. Oh, there we go. So there we go. There we go. You can see that there. It's got lots of lakes and stuff, but it's still a bit far inside, isn't it? So we've got that place called Hermitage, right? So obviously all of these sort of all these estuaries on the left there wouldn't have existed back then. So you can see how far this is in Ireland, a place called Hermitage. along the River Shannon, which is there on the left. So there we go. And you're thinking, well, hang on a minute. That's quite in the middle of Ireland, isn't it? And you're thinking, well, that's really interesting stuff. Very, very interesting stuff. And again, we got that idea of a burial in the heart of Ireland. Again, let's go with that date, 9,530 years ago, right? So approximately we're going to round that to 10,000. So we got evidence in Ireland that's really, really early, which is massive. And Ireland itself is still connected with mainland Britain. There's obviously this debate that it wasn't, but with our evidence that we looked at the other week, we're thinking that if we go over to here and we go to sort of where we've looked at Formby, which is just above Liverpool, and you're thinking, well, this is sort of estuarine, and we're talking about this was part of a big lake or something. Anyway, we're not here to talk about the geology at this minute. So again, what I'd like to do is obviously there we go. And what we find if we keep this map on here is prehistoric islands, it's later Mesolithic, prehistoric islands, Mesolithic sort of 9 to their Mesolithic is slightly different dating wise to about 9 to about 8,000 years ago, which is probably similar to what we've been saying anyway. What we think about is that they've also got similar tools to the microliths, but they're called macroliths, and you've also got these macroliths, which are actually to be found on the Isle of Man. And what we need to do, we need to look at those macroliths now. So it's like macroliths rather as opposed to microliths. So if we there we go. Up. Oh God, we got that there, and there we go. Those are these tools. What they're talking about, macroliths. There we go. The moss side hoard of Mesolithic band flakes. I was describing these as macrolith, but slightly different from what we're talking about. Blades and flakes. And they're talking about these objects. And they're saying here that that what you've got is that they're using these, and these are the tools that we're actually finding. And then what we're talking about is that this toolkit that they're using, these toolkits that we're using in Ireland, it's saying that they can't really see how the Mesolithic period in Ireland's sort of evolving into the Neolithic period. It's sort of everything seems to float, everything seems to keep going, and everything starts to then evolve to create great places like Newgrange in Ireland. You know, there's great sort of chambers and stuff. So there's lots of very strange things going on in Ireland where they've got these tools and they've got all this evidence. Until recently, there have been few signs of what was going on in the Mesolithic period, but now they're starting to find them. Is there evidence of settlements? Is society in one place, or is it moving around? So this is one interesting thing that we need to see more about when we're looking at Mesolithic Ireland. The island's extensive bog and alluvial deposits have concealed informative settlement evidence, and its acidic soils have decomposed and destroyed significant amounts of organic material. So this is rather interesting. So when we took it, this is a bigger subject in Ireland, and maybe I'm not giving it fair justice, right? And maybe I'm sort of doing it a little bit faster than I should do, right? But what they're saying in Ireland is that where we've looked at where we're looking at that, you know, we've got a coastal archaeology that's been destroyed in the Mesolithic period, and we've got inland archaeology that we're now actually starting to find. We've got Star Car, where we've got peat bog archaeology. We're seeing Boulder Cliff, where we've got the archaeological evidence there, and we've got the other sites that we're looking at in Blickmead, which is near Stonehenge. And remember, Blickmead is an inland site as well, but it's a flat inland site. In Ireland, they got the problem that the bogs and alluvial deposits, all the flooding, is either concealing the archaeology, or the acids, different types of acids in the bogs, are actually destroyed the archaeology. So that means that it's withheld our Mesolithic evidence, and it's been lost, right? So there's difference. The reason why they've been struggling in Ireland to find the evidence, and even earlier Paleolithic evidence, is because it's been hidden or destroyed by factors that we don't usually face. Because the evidence of Starcar is very different evidence than the destructive acids that are destroying the archaeological evidence in Ireland. So, you know, we're not getting parallels and comparisons. It's really difficult. So with these conditions that we're finding in Ireland, it's meaning that the archaeological record is incomplete, and we're really struggling to find it. We're really struggling to understand it. There's a site called Newferry in Ireland. And this site in Newferry, they found a lot of archaeological evidence associated with the Mesolithic period. It is fair to say that the Mesolithic period needs to be studied more in Ireland, and it needs to be greatly more studied. And this is what a senior archaeologist says about the situation in Ireland. Much further research is needed, and the outlook is unfortunately gloomy because the problems associated with the archaeological evidence being covered up by alluvial deposits, which are quite thick, or being lost in the acidic conditions which are around. Key sites of the right date will be hard to locate in the areas that we wish to find them, within the valleys and the estuaries. And the funding of problem-orientated research is not easy. We may have to wait patiently for chance discoveries of the appropriate kind. Archaeological work in Ireland is done differently than it's on mainland. It's mainly associated, again, funding of problem-orientated research. So, you know, there's different ways of doing things in Ireland. In truth, the pessimism in Ireland might be better directed to try and sort of hope for accidental archaeological evidence. So this next point sort of takes us in even deeper, right? So towards the end of the Mesolithic period in Ireland, other than the stray finds, is that they might be that Ireland could have a food and a shortage of food problem in the Mesolithic period. It's a little bit out there. It's a bit isolated. There might be less trees. There might be less animals. This is one thing they're saying. So they are excavating at some of these places. And what they're finding is that there is evidence of campsites in Ireland, which indicates that there are campsites at some localities in the midsummer months, where groups are seemingly foraging within the centre of Ireland, but we don't know anything more than that. Subsistence appears to be involved on desperately intimate resources, such as there's lots of evidence that these people ate eels, for example. There's lots of evidence as well near the coast at a place called Ferrita Cove that they're eating sea fish, shellfish, and in Ireland at this stage in the Mesolithic period, and this links in with what Pete said earlier on about animals and so on. They got evidence of wild pigs being found in Ireland at this stage. They've got evidence along the coast of Middens, and the similar evidence that we're seeing in Ireland associated with Middens is that they're eating lots of limpets, like the island of Aronsay and Colonsay, which is in the Hebrides of Scotland. They're also finding evidence that they're eating oysters, and they're eating sea mammals such as seals. And also, very interestingly, when we looked at islands like Ronsay and we looked at the Olympic mounds there, the similarity between there and Ireland is that they've got access to red deer as well. So the evidence for settlements is still quite low, right? And this is a very this is going to blow our minds, but this is a very important thing, right? I've never really seen this before, but we're going to do this. They think that across Ireland in the Mesolithic period, probably maybe about 8,000 years ago, they estimate, from whatever evidence they're looking at, over an area of in excess of 84,000 square kilometers, they believe that the population in Ireland is a whopping 8,400 individuals at any one time. And you're thinking, well, that's quite a lot of people. No, it's not. If you spread this thinly along the coast, along the lake shores and the river valleys, but 8,400 people is still a lot of people across Ireland in the Mesolithic period. And if that's the case in Ireland in the Mesolithic period, we're still trying to find the evidence. And that's from the limited data that we're thinking about. The evidence in Scotland must have been bloody huge. Must have been in the tens of thousands, if that's the estimate for Ireland. So what they're doing is that they're starting to see that they're getting lots of we'll read this out. So in the later part of the Mesolithic period, so about 8,000 years ago, lithic technology and raw material procurement says that they're sort of wandering around and sort of collecting what they can to use. They're also talking about that there's lots of types of objects like this being found across Ireland, like the one in front of us. They're talking about hammers that they're finding. We've obviously got the other evidence of the adze from the burial site as well. And they're talking, they're starting to talk about that the population on Ireland moved around a lot, because there's lots of little sites that they're hoping to find, and one or two sites that they're finding. And this is a very interesting quote, and this is where we'll end today. In truth, the evidence in Ireland in the later stages of the Mesolithic period, about 8,000 years ago, could be seen in the ideas that they may have actually they're starting to talk about that they're looking, that they're using lots of skins for things, such as skins for canoes and skins for sort of tents and wigwams and things like that, because they're saying that the evidence in Ireland is that they're consuming wild pig, and obviously the skin from a wild pig could be quite useful. This is what they're saying. This is what they're postulating. And what we're seeing with Ireland is that we're hoping to find a lot more over the next few years. So that would change the story over the brief information that I've given you about Ireland. But hopefully we're going to actually learn a lot from Ireland in the next few years about the Mesolithic period. I think the information from Ireland is so limited at this minute. So whatever we do find in the future is going to be so exciting. And that's where we're going to go. But not now. And that's going to be in a few years' time. So what we're going to do, we're going to finish there. So is there anything that anyone wants to say today? And what we're going to do is going to start off with Margaret. Margaret?
No, nothing from me.
Nothing from you. Nothing from you. It's going all dark in this tent now. Flipping it. Not. Pete, is there anything you want to say?
Yes.
Go for it.
Trying to remember what I was going to say now. Over in West Wales,
yeah,
where there was Mill Bay, where Henry landed. Over there, there was an ancient village, and within the village they found pot boilers and things like that, but also lots of flakes of flint, but the flint had come from Ireland.
Yeah,
The flint had been brought over from Ireland.
that's what we were saying with some of the stuff at Formby up in Merseyside
Yeah.
as well, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously there's this trade thing, and
Well, yes, and there's a veritable supply of flint in Ireland.
and maybe it's going to be similar evidence that we're seeing with, for example, with the Isle of Skye, where what we do see is that those trade links with rum. When we say trade links, we think of people sort of their idea of trade back then was completely a different concept than what we're thinking about. When we talk about trade, what were they talking about when they were talking about trade? And again, all that sort of interlinked, and obviously we need more information about that. Anyway, is that it, Pete?
And the geology of the Giant's Causeway.
Oh, that could you imagine what people thought of that in an early age?
Yeah.
No
We've got
wonder.
the same geological formation over in Scotland that you had at County Antrim.
And Pete, can I just say something that sort of is going to be quite challenging, right? You know, we think about the Giant's Causeway from the both sides of the Irish Channel as being created by a giant, and
Well,
yeah, but the thing, the name Finnegan rings a bell, but I don't know if that's anything to do with it or whatever. But anyway, Giant's Causeway, that's why it's called the Giant's Causeway. But think about this concept. Maybe they understood how things were formed.
well, obviously, it was formed by the movement of the Earth's crust.
Maybe people didn't think about giants, and maybe people didn't think about dragons, and they had a different way of thinking about the landscape that was around them.
They probably didn't understand that the Earth's crust had moved and created things like that.
Yeah,
so they put it down to a giant.
Yeah, but this is later on. What I'm saying, right? Okay, let me get something clear. Obviously, they wouldn't have known about the movement of the Earth's crust, but they would have known about geological phenomenon. This is what I'm talking about, because things are happening all the way around them, right? They would have seen the sea rising and stuff being inundated. They would have sort of had that concept, right? Which later generations would not have had. I.e., there's trees out there up on the Cardigan Bay, and people in the medieval period thought, it was the land of the little people, right? And they had no idea. But these people in the Mesolithic period saw the change. They understood the change. They knew it was coming. They also knew about this type of weird landscape, and maybe we don't give them credit where it's due.
No, I don't think we do, to be honest.
I don't think we do.
I don't think we appreciate the intelligence of these people.
And I'm there with you on that, Pete. We just don't have exactly. So right, okay. So where are we going to go next? Let's find out if who have we got left now? Should we be fair on David if he wants to go? David, Andy's left to talk. So what we're going to do, David, if you want to stay to listen to Andy talk, and that's fair enough. Before I ask you, David, if you've got anything to say, nice to have you along, David. Hopefully soon next week. And I'm going to say goodnight, David, if you don't want to hang on for Andy. But David, is there anything you want to say?
Oh, thank you. No, fine.
Okay. Anyway, Andy next. Andy, go on, you do your bit.
No, I don't really have anything to add to that. It's just kind of just touched on the tip of the iceberg in Ireland there, haven't you, really? So is it I'm more inclined to think that they just haven't found the stuff. Like it's almost like they're about 15 years behind where we're at with our Mesolithic finds and even into medieval. We've suddenly started finding a lot more stuff in the last 15 years.
In particular with Ireland's medieval period, I think the problem is Ireland has had its troubles, and its archaeology is not really been important. Yeah. And the biggest problem is what I'm seeing with Ireland now is its political archaeology. And unfortunately, when you've got it's like what was somebody telling me the other day? There was an archaeologist in the north trying to prove to somebody in the south that archaeology in the north is different in Ireland than the archaeology in the south. What an absolute load of balderdash.
Yeah, when we were over in Ireland in Castle Trains, they had the 12th of July's marching through the streets, and both sides were there cheering the bands on from Catholic and Protestants.
So that's
And
how
in one
it should
instance,
be.
they'd swapped churches because there wasn't enough room for the Protestants in the one, so the Catholics let them use their church, and they used the Protestant church.
Good.
And that
That's the
happened
way
in Ireland.
That's the way it should be, Pete.
Yeah.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
But I believe the problem in Ireland is that there's too much politics, and it just needs to settle. And maybe we're going to learn
Let's
more
hope
about
so.
Ireland.
I wonder if
Let's hope
early
so.
Mesolithic people were spiritual people. I mean, you're talking about them going back to the Cairngorms in a high place. But going forward in time to the Neolithic and the Langdale axe factory up at the top of the Langdale pikes, they've got exactly the same stone much lower down, which they could have excavated.
But they decided to go
Could it have
further.
been, I know you hate it, but could it have been a spiritual thing, the high place thing?
No, I think the word hate is a bit, but I hate it in later things. But I think navigating for a reason is a good purpose to do something. If you want to say Christopher Columbus, sailed 1492 over to America, that was for a reason, right? Because they wanted to find the new worlds, and they wanted to be close to
going
something.
to India.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, Andy's falling asleep now. But there could be other reasons, not just spiritual or spiritual and spiritual, why people are moving around, and we can't discount these things, Margaret.
No, but it was just the high place thing. It's unusual to have found a Mesolithic site up high, and I just wondered if it could have been. We just
Maybe there
don't
was
know what their mindset was, do we?
Maybe there was ice below that, and that was actually the floor level.
It must have been an advantage for going there.
Well,
Yes.
you usually go up high, so you've got a better view, don't you?
Well, that's why we go to the Cairngorms today.
Exactly. So
God, legend. Legend.
That's why I went up. I went up in Scotland up to Ben Nevis, went up to the top, but then I got in fog and couldn't see a damn thing anyway.
Yeah.
I went up Starfell Pike one Christmas day many years ago, and it was like a low mist hovering just below the mountain peak, and I could see people at the tops of other mountains. We could wave to one another, but you couldn't see anything below.
Yeah.
That was really weird.
Well, maybe that's why the Langdale Axe Factory is high up, because the visibility was better.
Yeah, could be.
Yep.
Yeah. Lots of different reasons, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And going back to the sense, it is another perspective. And finally, when I wake up in the morning here, right, if it's say, I don't know, 5 o'clock in the morning, I can look out and I can't see anything, because I can see it. I can see here, but the entire valley is like a blanket of
dim mist.
It's the whole thing, and you can see little things sticking out like little islands, right? And and then I can say, then it becomes very spiritual.
Yeah.
Remember at sea going up the River Elbe, and with a low-lying mist, and when you get up on the bridge, you could see across the river, but all you can see was the chimneys of the other boats going up and down. That was quite surreal.
Yeah,
You couldn't see the boat, but you could see a little chimney or mast going up the river.
So anyway,
During
I
the
gotta-
war,
during the war. During the war. Right. Anyway, so are there any other questions before we go?
no.
No,
No.
What we do next week?
Jersey. Aren't we doing Jersey?
I told you we got to get to Jersey.
Oh, Neolithic people, not Neolithic, what Neanderthals.
No. What we're gonna do in Jersey? We're gonna sort of flow the Paleolithic into the Mesolithic. That's what we're
Okay.
doing next week.
I might not be able to make it, but I'll try.
Oh, you ruined our lives, Andy. You're just a lightweight.
Well, I'm going on an archaeological trip.
Are you?
Well, it's a holiday for 2 weeks in Turkey, but there's a lot of archaeology, so I'm calling it
Oh,
an
I show you
archaeological
the
trip.
photographs of the Pogo in Jersey.
Oh
Ooh.
no, that's obviously all later, Pete. We'll do that all again.
The Pogo.
Andy, if you're on holiday in bloody Turkey, you're not going to be able to join us anyway.
Well, they've got internet over there.
You'll be too busy.
Well, I don't know. I'm
Well-
not planning to be busy. I want to lie down and do nothing.
have a
No,
good holiday.
Why go to Turkey?
'Cause that's
Exactly.
what the wife said.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, exactly. But she hasn't won her argument, Andy, in moving to London yet. So you
Not
still
yet,
keep,
no.
keep the. Right. Okay then. Anyway, if we don't see you, Andy, next week, have a nice time in
Thank
Turkey,
you.
and
Thank you.
if we do see you,
Yeah.
that'd be good.
Okay, I shall try.
Night now. Good night.
Okay,
David.
Night,
Bye, David.
Bye
Night,
bye.
David. Night,
Bye.
David.
Night, David.
Night. Well, I think that we'll call it a day anyway. So,
Oh,
Right
no.
then.
Andy, if you could, nobody else got anything else to say, Andy, David, Margaret, and Peter, and looking forward to seeing you all next week.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Okay.
Nice
Bye,
time in
all.
Turkey,
Bye.
Bye,
and thank you
Andy.
for your support,
Bye.
guys. See you soon. Bye.
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 See you, Pete.
Bye.
I'll be at the studio tomorrow, 11:30.
Right. I might be, I don't know.
All right
I've
then.
got a
Well,
problem with my motorhome that I've got to get done.
okay,
And
Pete.
if
Not a
he's
problem.
going to do that tomorrow, I might not be there, but we'll see.
Okay, brilliant.
If I've got nothing else on, I'll be there.
Okay, Pete.
12:30
Okay.
to
All
see
right,
the
Pete.
Trump,
Hopefully see you then.
to see the Trump supporters. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Pete.
Okay.
Hopefully see you then.
Right. Okay. Ta-da.
Take care, Pete. Night.
Bye. Bye. Good night.
Good night. Take care, Pete.
Good
Night.
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 Good night.
Night, Pete.
Night.
Night. We've got to end this.
Come on.
Okay. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you very much for watching tonight. I'm just going to go in the chat box. If there's no chat, then we're going to call this a night, and there's nothing in the chat box. So night, everybody.